All right, so we are in part 4 of our series on the book of Ruth, which means we're actually concluding the series. And because we're at the tail end of a story, let's go back and let's review a little bit. And this will be beneficial for those of us who've been around during the series, as well as those who might be jumping in here right at the tail end of the story. So in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth, we're introduced to a man named Elimelech and his family, and there's a famine in the land of Israel. And so Elimelech decides to leave his hometown of Bethlehem and to head to the land of Moab. Now, while in Moab, and they were there for 10 years, Elimelech dies, leaving his wife Naomi a widow in a foreign land. So Naomi, she tells her 2 boys. She's got 2 boys with her. She allows her 2 boys to marry Moabite women while they're there. But then both of Naomi's sons die, leaving Naomi a widow with 2 widows, 2 foreign Moabite childless daughters-in-law. So Naomi then decides to head back home to Bethlehem. She tries to convince her daughters-in-law to stay in Bethlehem because it's best for them to stay in their homeland than to head to Israel, to a strange foreign land. And Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, she agrees, she stays. But Ruth, she demonstrates fierce loyalty, compassion, kindness to her mother-in-law Naomi. And in fact, she says these very famous words, and let's read this together. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." And once again, what Ruth demonstrates here is a Hebrew word called hesed. And I've mentioned this throughout the series, every week during this series, because hesed, this is a major theme in the book of Ruth. Now, hesed, like I said, is a Hebrew word, and it describes intense emotions that someone feels towards someone, but then those emotions result in action to meet that person's need. And so that's what's happening throughout the book of Ruth. And this word hesed, this Hebrew word hesed, is such a big word. It's such a rich word that it's translated in lots of different ways throughout the Bible. Sometimes it's translated mercy, sometimes kindness, sometimes grace, goodness, compassion, steadfast love, loving kindness, faithfulness, loyal love. Hesed is all of these things. Well, by the time Ruth and Naomi return to Bethlehem, Naomi is feeling bitter. She's feeling empty. She's lost an awful lot. She's lost her home, the family property. She's lost her husband. She's lost both of her sons. And so she and Ruth, remember they're both widows. They're in a pretty desperate and hopeless situation at this point. Chapter 2 begins as Ruth decides to glean in the fields in order to feed herself and Naomi. And so a couple of weeks ago, we discussed this, the law of gleaning in Israel. Gleaning refers to the practice of allowing the poor, the widows, orphans, foreigners to gather leftover crops in the fields. And this was a way for the people of Israel to take care of the marginalized in their society. And it reflects the very character of God, and it reflects His heart towards the least of these. Well, through God's sovereign plan, Ruth just so happens to find herself gleaning in the fields of an Israelite man named Boaz. And Boaz has heard of Ruth's hesed towards her mother-in-law. And so he shows the same kind of hesed to Ruth by allowing her to glean in his fields, providing for her safety, and so much more while she's there. And he says to Ruth, let's read together, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." We also discover that through God's sovereign plan, Boaz just so happens to be a close relative and a guardian redeemer to the family of Elimelech. And so last week we talked a little bit about this idea of guardian redeemer. A guardian, a kinsman, or a family redeemer was an extended family member who had the responsibility to step in when one of their close relatives experienced hardship in one way or another. And to redeem, as maybe some of you know, means to buy back, to recover, to rescue, to restore. So it was the responsibility of the Redeemer to provide for, to meet the needs of that relative, to rescue and restore what was lost to them, to buy back family members that may have been sold into slavery in order to pay back a debt, to buy back property that may have been lost due to poverty. And in some cases, it was the responsibility of the guardian to marry the widowed family member, to have children in place of the deceased relative in order to restore the family line, which was a really big deal back in that day. So Boaz, he's been generous to Ruth. He's allowed her to glean in his fields, but there's still a problem for Ruth and Naomi. It's been several weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months, and their immediate needs have been met. They have food to eat, but they have no home, they have no security, and they have no hope for the future because their guardian redeemer hasn't taken action to redeem them yet. So chapter 3 begins as Naomi takes action on behalf of Ruth. And so Ruth, so far throughout the story, she has been the one to show tremendous hesed, sacrificial love, loyalty, compassion, kindness towards her mother-in-law, sticking with her, caring for her, providing for her needs, gleaning in the fields for her. And now Naomi is showing hesed to Ruth in return by looking out for Ruth's future. And so Naomi gives Ruth these specific instructions on how to approach Boaz and propose marriage to him. And so as we discussed last week, this was a pretty risky plan. You know, Ruth didn't have to do it, and it was risky because who knows how Boaz was going to respond. I mean, he could have just judged Ruth for it. He could have just written her off. But Ruth, go ahead. She does it. She does all that Naomi told her to do. She asks Boaz to spread the corner of his robe over her, and that's a symbolic act. That was a symbolic act back in that day to indicate marriage. So Ruth is asking Boaz to take her in, to care for her, to protect her, to be her refuge, to give her a secure future. And Boaz, once again, is blown away by Ruth's hesed. And he says once again to Ruth, let's read it together. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor." So Boaz recognizes this kindness, this compassion, this hesed of Ruth. By pursuing marriage to Boaz specifically, Naomi's guardian redeemer, Ruth is now looking out for Naomi's future as well. As their guardian redeemer, as their kinsman redeemer, it's if Boaz decides to redeem Ruth, then he's going to have to redeem Naomi as well. Naomi will find refuge in the home of Boaz as well. He'll need to redeem her property and restore the family line of Naomi's husband, Elimelech, as well. So chapter 3 comes to a close, and Boaz has agreed to redeem them. However, this is where we left off last week. We discover that Boaz is a guardian redeemer, but he's not the guardian redeemer. Apparently, there is another relative, a closer relative to the family, who should be given the opportunity to redeem them if he wants. And so the chapter 3 ends, and we're all left hanging. And so today, we come to the conclusion, the concluding chapter. We're going to see what happens next. So if you well, turn in your Bibles to Ruth chapter 4 if you have a Bible with you, or you can open up the Bible app, Ruth chapter 4, or just listen as I read. Ruth chapter 4. We're going to read this whole chapter here. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate, sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz says, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So we went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Then this is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. And that's the end of the story. Let's pray. God, we're grateful for your word. May your Spirit speak through it to us today so that we can be the people that you created us to be. Amen. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk through the chapter. So in the first chapter of Ruth, we saw Ruth taking action on behalf of Naomi. In the second chapter, we saw Boaz taking action on behalf of Ruth. In chapter 3, Naomi takes action on behalf of Ruth. And now, in the final chapter, Boaz again takes action, this time on behalf of Ruth and Naomi. So Boaz heads to the city gate, to the town gates, because that was the gathering place in a city, the place where business matters and where legal transactions were settled. So Boaz is basically calling for a town meeting here, inviting all the elders to be a part of it. And this, once again, is highlighting the character and integrity of Boaz. You see, Boaz could have just married Ruth if he wanted. He could have just, taken the action to redeem her, because we have to remember the setting of the story, which we've talked about several times throughout this series. During this time of Israel, people were just doing whatever they felt like doing. It was during the time of the judges, and, so what's the big deal? No one would have thought twice of it. Whatever, who cares? Boaz could have done that, but instead he does the right thing, and he seeks to give the guardian redeemer, the closer relative, the opportunity to fulfill his rightful role. Boaz is a man of integrity. Now I want to read verse 1 again. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down. He sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz says, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." Now, when we read this in our English translations, we just can't pick up on what's happening in the story. And so there are a couple things that I want to point out to you. Just like in chapter 2, so if you were here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this. The author in chapter 2 was using a literary device called hyperbolic irony. Hyperbolic irony. In fact, let me just turn back to chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 3 and 4. So Ruth went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrives from Bethlehem. So what a coincidence, right? What a coincidence that Ruth just so happens to be gleaning in the fields of Boaz, and it just so happens that Boaz arrives at just the right time. And so now, here in this chapter, chapter 4, Boaz sits down at the city gates, and what timing? It just so happens that the man he's looking for passes by right at that moment, just as Boaz sits down. Another coincidence. So like in chapter 2, the literal translation of just as actually is, and lo, or and behold. It's another way of saying, and wouldn't you know it? What a coincidence. So with this use of hyperbolic irony, the author is once again highlighting the role of God in the story without even talking about God at all. This can't be luck. This can't be fate. This can't be just coincidence. This is God's providence. This is God's sovereignty. God is at work behind the scenes in the lives of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. He's working things out according to his plan. He's doing his thing in his way. And how is God at work? God is continually and constantly at work in his world. He's moving in hearts. He's moving in the lives of people. He's working in ways that we can't even discern, we can't even fathom, we can't even imagine, we can't even understand. But quite often, and I would say most often, he's working through the actions of faithful people. So in this story, Ruth has acted on behalf of Naomi, and Naomi has experienced the hesed of God through the hesed of Ruth. Naomi has acted on behalf of Ruth, and Ruth has experienced the hesed of God through the hesed of Naomi. And now Boaz is once again taking action on behalf of Ruth and Naomi. And God is working among them, and God is doing his thing. But he's working through the faithfulness, their faithfulness, according to his plans and purposes. And this divine human partnership is also highlighted in another thing that's really hard for us to pick up in our English translations. And I really like this. Boaz calls this guardian redeemer. Do you remember what he calls him? And he says, "Hey, come over here." He says, "Hey, come over here, my friend." Let me read. He says, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." In the original language, though, Boaz is calling this man so-and-so. So-and-so. Hey, so-and-so, come over here. One Bible scholar actually likens this to calling someone Joe Schmo today. So come over here, Joe Schmo. Come over here, so-and-so. Now here's the thing. Boaz would have known this man's name. I mean, everyone knew everyone in a small town like Bethlehem. And he most certainly would have called the man by name. So what's happening here? Again, the author is making a point. He's highlighting something for us readers. He doesn't record the man's name on purpose. So as readers, he's just a so-and-so to us. But we do know the name Boaz. Why? Because, listen, this Joe Schmo isn't a man of action like Boaz. This so-and-so isn't a man of character and integrity, a man of hesed like Boaz, as we're going to see. And so at this town meeting that Boaz has called at the city gates, in front of all the elders of the city, Boaz reminds this guardian redeemer of his opportunity to redeem the property of Elimelech and Naomi. Verse 2, Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belongs to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next. I am next in line." So what's happening here? Apparently, when Elimelech and his family left during the famine, and they headed to the land of Moab, 10 years prior, he must have given his property, sold his property to someone outside the family. However, and this is a big deal. This is a big deal for the people of Israel. In Israel, no one owned the land. And God made this very, very clear that no one owned the land. He owned the land. He owned all of their land, and they were to just be stewards of his land. And so the land was divided among the various clans and the various tribes of Israel. And the land that was allotted to each of the families was supposed to stay within the family. But when Elimelech died in Moab, the right to his property was to go to his firstborn son, Mahlon, Ruth's late husband. But then, of course, he passed away, and then his younger brother passed away. So Mahlon still has the rights to the family property. But his mother, Naomi, has no resources to buy it back, to redeem it for the family. So what she's doing, she's selling it. She's selling her rights. She's selling her rights to a close family member who is able to do that, who is able to be the guardian, the kinsman, to redeem the land and to steward it in her place. And so once again, Boaz is bringing it to the attention of this family redeemer, this guardian redeemer, giving him the opportunity to fulfill his role as redeemer, and he says he'll do it. At the end of verse 4, he says, "I will redeem it. I will redeem it." But then Boaz reminds him of his other responsibilities. Boaz said, "On the day you buy back the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." When the guardian, the family pays Elimelech's debt and acquires and buys back the property in order to keep it in the family, he will also acquire the responsibility to redeem Mahlon's widow, Ruth, the Moabite, in order to continue Elimelech and Mahlon's family line. In that case, no, he says. He changes his mind. At this point, the guardian redeemer says, "I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Why did he change his mind? Why do you think he changed his mind? He was willing to buy the land because this would be a good return on his investment. He could work the land. He could steward the land. He could make back his money and more. However, who would want to marry Ruth? Who would want to marry a foreigner? Who would want to marry a Moabite? Who would want to have Moabite children? Moabite blood in their family. And besides, if he marries Ruth and he fathers a daughter through her, that child will eventually inherit the land. So he's going to end up, having to give up the land anyway. There's really nothing to gain here, just greater investment, greater responsibility to take care of an old widow, her poor Moabite daughter-in-law. Who would want to marry Ruth? Boaz. Boaz does. Because Ruth's more than just a foreigner to him. She's more than just a Moabite to him. He's noticed her. He's taken time to get to know her. He's seen her loyalty, her compassion, her kindness. He's witnessed her hesed, and he knows what kind of person she is. Now, we've seen throughout this series just several cultural practices that are kind of strange. They're really weird to us, and so there's one more thing in this chapter that's really strange. Once the guardian forfeits his opportunity, he makes it official in front of the elders of the city, at the city gates, by removing a sandal. Let me read it here. Now, in the earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to come final, one party took off his sandal, gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." He removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi and all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." And so as I was reading this, as I was studying this, I was reminded of a trip that Christy and I took 15 years ago. We took a trip to Israel, and I think it was around 15 years ago. We took this trip with our previous church. And so as I'm reading this, I'm studying this, as I'm preparing this, I was reminded of a specific picture that we took. And we took probably hundreds of pictures. There was one particular picture that we took. We're at the entrance to a city gate. And I can't remember the situation. I can't remember what was being discussed and what was being taught at the time, but apparently we were making a business deal. So then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah, and may you be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." And Tamar is another story that we could really get into. Another, probably a Canaanite woman who's now in this family line. Unlike Boaz, so-and-so was looking out for his own interests. He showed no concern for Ruth, for Naomi, for their family line. He probably just wanted to make a buck. Therefore, he's just Joe Schmo to us. No one knows his name. But think about this. For the past 3,000 years, everyone who's heard of this story or everyone who's read this story knows Boaz. He's become famous, not just throughout Bethlehem, but listen, we are talking about Boaz 3,000 years later, right here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a little church like Living Grace. Because Boaz was faithful. He was a man of action, a man of character, a man of hesed. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age." for your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. Now, some say that this book actually should be named Naomi instead of Ruth, because it's really a story of how Naomi went from bitterness and emptiness to fullness of life and purpose. She went from experiencing pain and tremendous loss to finding restoration and redemption. But at the end of the story, we find out that there was so much more at stake than just one woman and one family. And in order to see this, we have to be reminded of the setting of the story once again that we've talked about throughout this series. Remember that this story is taking place during the time of the judges, when everyone just was doing as they seemed fit, as they saw fit. It's a time in Israel where covenant faithfulness, loyalty, compassion, kindness is scarce, when most people are just looking out for number one, most people are just doing their own thing. And so when we read through the book of Judges, which remember is right before the book of Ruth, we are left with some very concerning questions, not only about Israel, but about the world. Is it possible for this covenant relationship between God and Israel to survive such betrayal? The people of Israel were so unfaithful to God. Is there any hope of redemption from such sinfulness and depravity? How can God preserve the royal line of the king when the royal line is filled with such corruption and injustice? Because remember, God promised that a king would come someday. A king would arrive, and the king would set things straight, and the king would make things right. And that doesn't seem possible now. It doesn't seem possible. But then we come to the story of Ruth. We see that God is still at work. We see that He's always faithful. We see that God will fulfill His promises no matter what. That He's at work behind the scenes doing His sovereign thing. He's moving in hearts and He's moving in lives at just the right time, in just the right places to bring about His plans and purposes. But for Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, just ordinary people, living ordinary lives, making ordinary decisions, they could never have known in the midst of those ordinary moments that they were active participants in God's plans and purposes, not only for Israel, but for the entire world. Remember Orpah? We were introduced to her in the first chapter, the one daughter-in-law. She chose to stay in Moab for her own benefit, and no one blames her for that. We don't know anything about her life. So-and-so, out of self-interest, chose to abandon his responsibility, and we don't even know his name. But Ruth, she chose self-sacrifice. She chose to act with hesed towards her mother-in-law. Boaz, he chose self-sacrifice. He chose to act with hesed towards Ruth. And through God's sovereign plan, along with the participation of faithful, loving people, a life was restored, and a family line was redeemed, a kingly line. And so the story of Ruth ends like this, just with a boring genealogy. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David. King David. Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz, they couldn't have known. They couldn't have known in this moment what was at stake. That God would use their ordinary decisions to preserve the kingly line of Israel. that their ordinary decisions would lead to King David, that Ruth, a Moabite, an enemy of the Israelite people, would be the great-grandmother of King David, and eventually a great ancestor in the line of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus, the ultimate Redeemer, restorer of all things. So what are our takeaways for today? I mean, this is just an awesome book in the Bible, and so many things, so many takeaways that we could discuss, and I'll probably give you an opportunity to share your biggest takeaway here in a little bit if there's time. But let me just share a couple of my biggest takeaways. All we have to do is just look around at our world. I mean, just look around at our world today. In a world of desperate need, in a world where everyone just seems like they're doing as they see fit, right? Through Jesus, God has provided redemption for humanity. He's provided the restoration of all things that's not right in the world. And we need to be reminded of that. And we need to be reminded that God is still at work. He's still doing his thing. He's continually and constantly at work. And as it says in the book of Job, chapter 42, verse 2, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. God is doing his sovereign thing. And someday, his sovereign purposes for the world, setting all things straight and making all things new, will be accomplished. And you can count on it. But while God is at work, doing his thing, our work is extremely important. As we see throughout the Bible, and as we've seen throughout history, for some reason, God, by his grace, has always desired to partner. He's decided to partner with human beings in his work. And as his people, we can become active participants in God's plans and purposes for his world. We are his hands. We are his feet. We are his body, doing his work in the world. Just ordinary people, living ordinary lives, making ordinary day-to-day decisions. But here's the thing. God can take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. And God can use the so-and-sos and give them an identity and purpose that matters through everyday faithfulness. Our acts of self-sacrificial hesed become powerful acts of redemption and restoration in the world. God uses faithful people, but he also uses messy people with messy stories, like Rahab, like Tamar, like Ruth, Naomi. So what's your story? What's your story? God can use it, and God can redeem it for his glory, which means we better think twice about pointing fingers at people and writing people off. We don't know a person's story. We don't know a person's story. We don't know what they've been through. King David had a Moabite great-grandmother. We now know her story. Jesus had enemy blood flowing through his veins. Think about that. He had Moabites and Canaanites in his family line. If God can redeem them and their stories, and God can redeem you and your stories, then let's not write people off. Let's not point fingers at those who God wants to redeem and restore and welcome into his family. our family.